Hey, everybody. Welcome to GLIAC Weekly along with Tony Nicolette. I am Chuck Bittner. And Tony, I'm really proud of myself. I did not fumble the opening kickoff. I didn't say welcome to Inside D2 Football because it's midweek and we are here for GLIAC Weekly. I'm standing in for Whit this week. We're trying to give our guy a little bit of a break in the podcast routine. Of course, everyone watching sees Whit 3 or 4 times every week. He puts a ton of effort into doing these podcasts. We wanted to give him a little bit of a respite. So I'm here this week to help Tony walk through our first week of conference play in the GLIAC. Tony, a little bit of an odd situation for this past week and coming into this week. We only had one game last week. I believe there were supposed to be 2. We lost one, unfortunately. A little bit of an odd scenario here where almost everybody's coming off of a bye week. And of course, in case of Grand Valley coming off 2 bye weeks. So this is a little bit of an odd situation for us at midseason.
It is extremely odd. And so, yeah, I mean, I basically got a break. We all got a break in the GLIAC this week for the most part. And let's be honest, we all need a break from Whit, not just him needing a break. So, it's probably a good thing.
Well, our audience certainly does.
Well, fair enough. The thing of it is it's weird because I was getting ready for the show and I'm thinking through how we're going to position things. And it's like, gosh, it almost feels like I have to do like a preseason show again because it's been so long since anything's happened. It's like, it's only 1 week, but it sure seems like a lot of inactivity that we've had to wade our way through. So
when I was looking at Grand Valley's game coming up this week, I thought, man, that Pitt State game feels like so long ago. It's only 2 weeks, but it feels like it was so long ago. That's just the nature of how quickly things move once we get into the fall. So let's dive into it. So here we are coming out of our post bye week depression.
That's right. Everybody missing football.
Everybody up in Michigan had a little bit of a lull, but
that's right.
We're back at it. So on from the bye week. There was one game last week, Tony. We did have Wayne State playing Quincy, 31-14 final, but I believe this was a 3-point ball game heading into the fourth quarter. So are there some positive takeaways here for Wayne?
You'd like to think so. And I did get a chance to watch a good chunk of this game, in part because there wasn't a lot else to watch other than some of the other things from around the country. I think one of the things that we're starting to see that's thematic with Wayne is just the offense is not clicking just yet. And, Wayne teams, even under the new leadership of Tyrone Wheatley, have still always been very run-focused football teams. And I'm pretty sure, the Warriors only had like 58 yards on the ground in this game. So my concern as we're starting to move into league play is if they can't run the ball against Quincy, no disrespect to Quincy, but I mean, that's not your standard week in, week out GLIAC defense that you're going to see, particularly up front. That is not a good sign, for the Warriors and what they're going to be able to do to try and scratch out a win here over the next 7 weeks in league play. Now, Champ Edwards did have a decent day throwing the ball, and you're right, this was a 3-point game. Headed into the fourth quarter, and the Warriors had kind of found a way to stick around and get a couple of turnovers and do some stuff. But gosh, at the end of the day, they just couldn't close things out. And I think the inability to run the ball and that lack of balance really just made them a little bit easier for Quincy to defend over the course of the game. And that ended up being part of what allowed the Hawks to be able to kind of stretch things out. And, the Warriors had a turnover or two there as the game progressed as well.
And it seems like at times this year, Wayne has been able to play some pretty solid defense, but go back to the Findlay game where they held a really impressive looking Oilers team to just 7 points. Defense kept them in this one, but man, you're just putting a lot of pressure on that unit if you can't move the ball on the ground.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with my camera, but hopefully everybody can still hear me. But yeah,
we're going to roll with it, Tony. We've got your voice, and that's the most important thing, really.
No one wants to see me anyway.
So we'll just roll with it. So that, unfortunately, was our only GLIAC game last week. So we'll start rolling into to this week. But a couple things that we'll touch on, and since we have a little bit of time, a couple things we'll touch on before we get there. What's the puzzled look here for Coach Metlack?
Well, this was, and hopefully Coach Matlack doesn't mind that I'm using his frustration with how things went against Upper Iowa. And this was actually a really great press conference. You could see just how frustrated he was at how his team played against Upper Iowa a couple weeks ago. But I think that's kind of how GLIAC fans are feeling after the non-conference portion of the schedule. We all know that this league is better than what it showed on the field. That's probably what Coach Metlack was expressing there in terms of how his players delivered against the Peacocks a couple Saturdays ago. But I mean, he started out 9-4 through the first 2 weeks of non-conference play, and then just slugged our way to a 12-16 finish. Now it was 11-12 against Division II opposition, but nevertheless. I think we all thought that the league would at least be over 500 at this point and have put together a better string of performances than what we saw. But, we saw a few teams, drop some games that maybe we weren't thinking that we would. And we did get, a couple teams, give some performances and win a game or two here or there that maybe we didn't expect. But all in all, it was, I think, frustrating watching how the results ended up here over these first handful of weeks.
Yeah, and it was good to circle back to that. I know you and Whit didn't go through that one because we didn't do a GLIAC Weekly midweek a week ago. That to me certainly was one of the more surprising results of the out-of-conference schedule. Now, to be fair, Upper Iowa is not the Upper Iowa of 3-4 years ago. They've really come a long way, and getting into the GLVC has really helped them advance their program to the point that they're a winning team and they're contending in that league. But we had just gotten Michigan Tech into the top 25. I think they were probably down there in like that cursed 24, 25 line, which tends to be an early exit right back out of the poll. And unfortunately, it bit the Huskies, but still a lot of football to play. So we'll see if they can earn their way back into the conversation. And before we do shift our focus, then a couple of other things just to talk our way through from the week that was, going back to would have been I guess really weeks 3 and 4. So what else do you have to recap from there, Tony?
No, I think we just need to take some time. We got a bit of a pause here this past week, and let's what do we know about some of these teams as we've come out, right? So Davenport, on a missed 2-point conversion at Truman, they're that play away from being 3-0, and DeJuan Mathis is kind of taken over that mantle as the starting quarterback there for Davenport. So they're starting to see a little bit more consistency on offense, and I think their matchup at Grand Valley this weekend that we'll talk about here a little bit later in the show is a really interesting one for a whole host of reasons. But, the Panthers, like I say, are a whisper away from being unbeaten themselves. And Cephas Harris is really who I should have a picture of there. I'm just not a very good producer when it comes to these things, because that guy's been over 100 yards in each of his 3 games since transferring in. And I think he's got 8 touchdowns on the ground already. So big ups in the running game there for the Panthers, with the Harris family continuing to contribute to Davenport Panther football players that are really good. So, and Roosevelt was able to get a win in the early going over Quincy. Zach Zella is a JUCO transfer who's kind of settled in as the signal caller for the Lakers, and he's done a pretty nice job. We've talked a lot on the show over these first few weeks about Alex Bueno and what he's been doing for Tech. I think we also started to talk a little bit more about how much better Tech's defense is than it has been in past years. And then, up there in the upper left there, that's the Ferris offensive line kind of doing what it does. I mean, it's real easy to get caught up in the numbers that Wyatt Bauer's putting up as a redshirt freshman quarterback as a starter. But obviously, he's got to have some guys paving the way and keeping him protected. And that offensive line is continuing to do what they've done in championship seasons past. And I think that's just the biggest difference that I've seen from being around the country. I did six boots on the ground games in the first 16 days of the season. And that was one of the things that still stuck with me, was just how good Ferris's offensive line is playing already this early in the season comparatively to what I've seen around the rest of the country. And that's going to have a big influence on what happens the rest of the way for sure.
Bad news for everybody else, because there have been a couple seasons more recently where, we knew Ferris's offensive line was going to be good, but we thought we needed to see it come together a little bit to see those guys in midseason form early in the season. Bad news for everybody else. So good opportunity to move the ball around the horn there a little bit and talk about some players and some teams, since we did not have GLIAC players of the week this past week. Of course, since there was only one game, conference didn't do the Player of the Week honors, so it was a good opportunity for us to just go around the horn a little bit and talk about some superlatives that we've seen so far in the season to date. One more topic that we wanted to cover, because we haven't really addressed it so much here for the GLIAC audience, and that is the realignment of the super regions. Again, good opportunity to introduce this topic, Tony, since we have a little bit of airspace. And also, the calendar has turned over to October, which means in another couple weeks, this is going to become really important to us, because we are going to start looking at the jockeying for position in the regional rankings. And of course, we all know how important that is. There's been movement here in all 4 super regions, but let's just kind of focus on the new Region 3. So the GLIAC stays in SR3, but some new company this year.
Well, it isn't from the standpoint that if you look at the way Super Region 3 used to be aligned, whatever it was 10, 12 years ago, the Northern Sun was a part of that regional alignment. And then there were a lot of the teams that now make up the Great Midwest that were a part of the GLIAC back then. So in terms of the roster of the teams, this is actually almost going back to an old alignment of sorts. But essentially, yeah, you're right, Chuck. I mean, in simplest terms, Super Region 3 picks up the Great Midwest and the Northern Sun, and the MIAA and the GAC move their way out to Super Region 4. And, I think it's interesting from the standpoint that some of the first round games now gets to have a chance to be more condensed. When you start looking at how close the GMAC is in proximity to the GLVC and the GLIAC, there's still going to be some travel involved for anything that's going to involve Northern Sun teams. But I just think it's an interesting look in terms of, we all know how difficult Super Region 3 was when it was the GLIAC, the GLVC, the MIAA, and the GAC. And so I think it's interesting to see now that this change has been made, and it kind of distributes the power maybe just a little bit. I don't know. I still look at what Super Region 4 is now, and I think to myself, I don't know that this necessarily distributed things a whole lot more evenly across the country in terms of the power conferences being still kind of lumped together or not. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it, Chuck? I mean, I know Division 2 is still committed to the regional alignment, and as long as that's the case, we're always going to be kind of having to have these types of discussions. But I guess I'd be curious as to what your thoughts are.
Well, the thing that stands out the most is that you've got the GLIAC and the MIAA now in different regions. So it gets us to the possibility of the best team coming out of the GLIAC playing the best team coming out of the MIAA in a national championship game. We haven't had that for the last several years. And you and I both know that there's a history there of national championship games between those two conferences.
Yep.
And they were not the blowout losses that we've seen in the last couple of years. So that's very exciting. It does redistribute some of the power teams around Division 2. What it doesn't do is completely even the scales here, because the teams and the programs that we know are going to be national championship contenders are all in regions 3 and 4. There's a couple out of the Gulf South that we know are pretty good, but I mean, honestly, even Valdosta State the last couple of years, it hasn't really matched up. We'll see this year. West Florida played at Grand Valley last year. They played at Ferris State the year before. Didn't go that great. So, there's going to be a good team that comes out of each one of those regions. Do we expect the best team from those regions to match up with the best teams out of 3 and 4? Likely, probably not. So This is a start, would be kind of my reaction. It's a good start. It doesn't get us to where we ultimately want to be.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think this does at least shift the dynamic a little bit to where, instead of, what was it when we had our, when we got to the end of the regular season last year, I'm trying to remember what the numbers were. I think we had something like 8 of the top 10 teams in our D2football.com poll were all in Super Region 3. Does that sound about right? It was something akin to that. Right. It was like 8 of the top 10 and 12 of the top 15 or something like that. This at least blends that a little bit more. And I think you're right. The idea then that, okay, at least a couple of these conferences now have a chance to actually play each other, either in a semi or in a final versus in a regional final, is definitely an improvement of the overall scenario. But yeah, it's, we could talk for hours about what we'd actually like it to be. So we won't do that here, but this at least gives, GLIAC fans, because Whit and I we had so much to cover in the preview shows that we didn't really spend any time on this. I wanted to make sure that we, at least before we got too close to playoff time, kind of gave everybody a reminder that this shift has happened.
Oh yeah, and I have been ruminating since they announced the regions on just the possibilities of something like Duluth playing Ferris State in the early rounds. What if you have like a Western Colorado playing at Harding? We know that that's an outstanding defensive coaching staff. What could they do against the Bisons and the offense that they have? So many really cool things that we ultimately could see down the road, and I'm really excited to see what those regions can deliver for us.
Yeah, me too.
And of course, we'll be talking about that in great detail on Sunday nights coming up in a couple of weeks. But for now, let's start looking at what's coming up. So bad news, Tony, we're into conference play. So now we're on half pay for the rest of the year because we only have 4 games to talk through. So, so that's,
I'm loving it.
It does lighten the workload a little bit.
Show prep gets a lot simpler.
Well, and the number of games that you have to be watching and have eyes on just to keep up with all the teams and everything that they're doing, it certainly makes that task a lot easier as well.
Indeed.
So there is our schedule, mostly early games. We have a 1:00 kick in Detroit. Then we have a couple of 2:00 games as well. And then Davenport at Grand Valley, a 4:00 kick time. So let's go through each one of these and look at the tail of the tape and kind of talk through what you're expecting for each one of these 4 matchups. So we will begin with Michigan Tech going to Wayne. Of course, the Warriors still looking for that first win of the season. Huskies coming off that very difficult loss to Upper Iowa. What are we looking for here in this one, Tony?
Well, one of the things that I've always been a little bit concerned with Michigan Tech over the last handful of years is their inability to run the football. And they're not having that difficulty this year. You can see they're averaging over 150 yards a game. They've been very consistent in terms of how they've used the run as a key part of their offense. Again, Alex Bueno as a dual threat has certainly helped with that. But in general, it seems like Tech's offensive line play has been a little bit sturdier this year, and their ability to run the ball has been far more effective than it has been in years past. In fact, I want to say a couple of years ago, in their 11 games, they might have only gone over 100 yards like once. And so we're starting to see now Metlak's recruiting and his influence over the program has really started to push that number up. And we all know that you have to be able to run the football to be truly able to win games, especially over the course of 4 quarters and as we get towards November and December. Now, with that said, Wayne is actually pretty good against the run. And if you look at what Wayne does top to bottom on defense, they've actually held a lot of teams relatively in check and kept games somewhat close for stretches of time. That game against Tiffin wasn't really a blowout until Tiffin stretched it out in the second half. We saw the same thing with Quincy the other day, and we all know we're still kind of talking and scratching our heads over the fact that Findlay only won that game 7-3 against the Warriors, right? So, and I've had some input from a few different folks around the league who will all say, hey, you put Wayne on tape and that defense is better than you'd think it would be. They do some things to really make things difficult for you. And my, kind of crude, line of demarcation is hey, if you're as a defense holding teams under 100 yards rushing in college football and Division II in particular, okay, it may not make you elite, but you're going to be in the top half, if not the top third of the country in doing that. And both of these teams are keeping teams under 100 yards a game. So, which team figures out how to run the ball, I think is going to be going to have the odds on, advantage in this one. Certainly Tech has the track record through 4 games of being more effective at that than Wayne. And so that's going to be critical is, all right, how is, the Warrior offense going to figure out how to move that ball on the ground? Is it going to be all Champ Edwards? The problem is I think they rely on him for so much. They're going to have to figure out some way to get some balance going. And then again, is Tech going to be able to continue what they've done with Alex Bueno and Jake Roof in the run game and be able to kind of control that line of scrimmage and stretch things out as the game moves along?
All right. So that is one of the early games. I think that's the 1:00 kickoff. Let's go next to Northern Michigan at Saginaw Valley. Tony, am I completely crazy for thinking that Northern has a shot in this game?
Oh, you're not crazy at all. And in fact, if this game were in Northern, I'd have a real hard time actually not putting the Cardinals full go upset alert, because let's just face it, Chuck, Saginaw Valley so far this year has just not lived up to what we thought they were going to be coming into the season. And we knew that the defense was going to have essentially a full rebuild. I mean, they lost so much talent off of that defense last year that I think anybody who puts them on tape would actually realize that may have been one of the top 5 defensive units in the country. They were really, really good, and they were so loaded at all 3 levels of the defense. And all 3 of those levels just got clobbered either by graduation or the transfer portal. And so we knew it was going to be a full rebuild. But I think the thing about Saginaw through 4 games that we're the most puzzled with is that total offense number. And while, yeah, they've been running the ball okay, I'm still a little confused as to really what their identity is. I don't think we saw Terrence Brown in that last game, so I don't know what his availability is. Mason McKenzie hasn't been, a dominant elite force when it comes to running the football this year. And again, from the quarterback position, you don't necessarily want your guy doing all of that heavy lifting. But again, their inability to close out drives and put points on the board has just been so perplexing. And they had that one explosive game against Gannon, but if you really look at that game against Northwood, they just kind of didn't do very much. Northeastern State kind of didn't do very much. They rallied at New Haven a couple of weeks ago, and I'll give credit to New Haven. They've got some more scholarship guys on that roster now. But I still, at the beginning of the season, fully expected the Cardinals to go out there and win that game, and it was, I think, 35-14. Going into the fourth quarter, if my memory serves. So, I mean, that's the part of this that has just been so baffling to me, is how Saginaw's offense just has not been able to put a lot of points on the board this year with all the guys that they brought back, and having the only quarterback in the GLIAC who started every game at that position last year. So from that standpoint, certainly, I think this game becomes far more interesting, because it's like, okay, what kind of offensive output are we going to see from Saginaw? For Northern Michigan, they've actually been really close in most of their games. That Davenport game a couple of weeks ago, which, don't get me started on how this nonsense happened, but Northern and Davenport are playing each other twice this year. That game was actually a conference game. The one later in the year is non-conference. So the Davenport Panthers actually, as we sit here, are in first place in the GLIAC, because they're the only GLIAC team that's won a GLIAC game thus far. But I digress. Northern, their offense has really been better this year, and they're still, applying, kind of that triple option look. And you see kind of a mix between Duke Schovald and Austin Rydell at quarterback. Noah Dobert's actually had a couple of big games for them at running back. Jahai Wood's a proven commodity in that from the backfield as well. And we've seen him have some good games. But the funny thing is like, against Davenport a couple weeks ago, they had 0 pass yards. And yet they've had a couple of the other games, like I think against Northwood, they were in the 230s. And they actually got a couple of big plays in the pass game that flipped the field and actually helped them put points on the board and kept that game close. And really, Northern had a shot to win it in the end there. So this is a Northern team that is playing teams far more aggressively and stiffly than they have the last couple of years, as they've been putting this triple option offense into play. And I'm telling you right now, if Saginaw's defense is not ready for this, this could be a ball game that I think a lot of people don't necessarily expect. So this actually, normally you just see the 2 names and you just don't think that, okay, this is going to be much of a game. This is one I'm actually very excited to sit and watch, because I want to see what Northern does offensively in this game. Do they go with balance, or do they just hit Saginaw on the mouth? Can they do it effectively and use that midline veer to be able to try and triple option their way to a win?
I'm excited for this one too, Tony. It just feels like it's coming for Northern.
Yeah.
So is it going to be this week? I don't know. Is it still a couple weeks down the road? But I feel like it's coming. The competitiveness of this year's Northern Michigan team versus last year and the year before, it's not even close. to the same thing. When you look at the points for and the points against, where they're at now versus where they
For
were at
sure.
the end of last year. I mean, the number of times that they were close last year, I don't know if there might have been one or two. They've really been in every right.
Yeah.
They've really been in every game this year. They've been very competitive, possibly even were unlucky not to win a game or two. So
yeah, and at the end of the day, look at that total defense number down there. I mean, the same thing. They're doing the same thing to teams that we were talking about earlier, holding people under 100 yards rushing. So, again, Saginaw's weakness seems to be more in the pass game, which obviously that's not where Northern's going to lean on if they had their druthers. But man, I'm telling you, this is one that actually is far more interesting, I think, than maybe people would have given it credit for at the beginning of the season.
I agree. All right, let's go on to our next one. Speaking of teams waiting for a breakthrough, maybe it'll happen for Ferris State one of these days. Of course, Bulldogs coming off the bye week. Before that, they had the homecoming game against Rio Grande. Really nothing to unpack there. Total mismatch in that one. But nonetheless, Bulldogs rolling at 4-0, playing a Roosevelt team at 1-2.
Yeah, and obviously, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about Ferris State thus far this year, even on the national show. I mean, we did have them on a couple of times because they beat Pitt State in that opener. And I think Pitt State's a different football team now than they were at the time when Ferris played them. But Ferris looked really strong up front, like we talked about earlier, and we'll probably talk about through a lot of the season. So we know going in that Ferris State's going to have an advantage in this game in the trenches. Wyatt Bauer has played really, really well in his first 4 starts as their quarterback. You've seen them mix in some Chase Carter, and even Carson Gulker gets into the mix either as an H-back, as a pass catcher. Sometimes he gets a carry, and he's actually taken some snaps under center too. So, Ferris is Ferris. There's not a whole lot to talk about here because they're doing pretty much what we would have expected them to do. Roosevelt is a team that they managed to scratch out the 1 win last year, and they were able to get a win so early in the season this year where you're like, okay, hey, they kind of overcame the coaching change and losing some guys via the portal. But they picked up a few guys, and some of those guys are starting to put in some play. So we talked about Zach Zella a little bit earlier in the show. He's actually been pretty consistent for them at quarterback. I mean, 275 yards a game throwing the football is not a small number, and it takes some consistency, both in terms of what you're doing, running your offense, but your receivers have got to make plays for you as well. And the Lakers have been able to do that. So, one of the issues that we're going to have in this game, though, is obviously Roosevelt trying to establish a ground game is really going to be difficult. Ferris has one of the top rush defenses in the country at under 50 yards a game. And obviously that's one of their bread and butters is they're going to win up front on defense as well. Now, is there something that we've seen in Ferris that I think Coach Anise maybe would like to see shored up as the season progresses and they move through GLIAC play? Yeah, it's probably the back end of the defense because they have given up some passing yardage numbers. Tiffin threw for 300 plus. I think Pitt State threw for 290 something. So they've had a couple of games where they've given up maybe a little bit more than they would have liked on the back end. And if that's what Roosevelt's capable of, who knows if they catch a couple of big plays, maybe they keep this one close at least for a while, but I just can't see this one staying tight for all 60 minutes.
No, I would agree, but maybe it is an opportunity to Ferris to work on some of those areas where they probably do need to get just a little bit better before the end of the season. All right, let's go on to our final game on Saturday. This will be the late afternoon kickoff at Grand Valley. We have Davenport coming in at 2-1. Lakers also at 2-1. 2 weeks since the road trip game at Pitt State. Kind of a long time to sit on that one. I'm sure that they moved on from it pretty quickly, but that rare 2-week break, I have no idea if it's a good thing, a bad thing, or if it just doesn't matter at all. But we'll see if the Lakers have been able to use it to their advantage.
Well, and I think that's kind of the big question, right? I mean, all right. And obviously Grand Valley didn't design it this way. Sure. They did have a game scheduled. And I'm given to understand that there was a cancellation involved. And, hey, sometimes those things sort of happen between schools and it's what it is. The Lakers, I don't think, again, they didn't want to have 2 weeks off, but that's the way it worked. And so they're going to try to make the best of it. So if they did make the best of it, we're going to learn quick in this one because, how well they're able to protect Andrew Schuster, who, obviously came out guns blazing in those first 2 games and threw for 300 plus and a whole bunch of touchdowns. and was really ineffective at Pitt State. The offense as a whole, again, I think mustered it was something south of 210, I think, for the whole game. And you're just not used to seeing Grand Valley teams go into situations where they can't run the ball. At least by the third or fourth quarter, when they've figured some things out and maybe worn the opposing defensive front down, and then they can't pass protect. And so I think how well the offensive line comes along, we're going to finally get a chance to see for the first time in 3 weeks, what development has happened with that group, and does that make a difference? I think defensively, obviously, we know that similar to Ferris, the Lakers really, really good against the run. And that might be the most interesting matchup to watch in this game is, okay, what does the Davenport offensive line and Cephas Harris do against certainly the most difficult rush defense that they've seen so far this season? I'm sure Coach McEwen and his staff would have still loved to have had that game against Lincoln last Thursday night that got canceled. If for no other reason, just to get an additional set of reps in, with some live action before actually having to take on a defensive front like Grand Valley's. So, there are definitely some storylines here. I mean, DeJuan Mathis has never had what you would consider to be a really good game against Grand Valley. So, is he going to be able to go the distance and actually make some plays for the Panthers? I think, and maybe leverage his running ability to try and kind of offset things and keep the Lakers off balance a little bit versus just keying on Harris and what they try to do in the straight backfield run game. All those sorts of things are going to be great things to watch. And can he, take advantage of a Grand Valley secondary that, through the first couple of games really wasn't all that good, but did probably play its best game of the year at Pitt State in a tough environment. So just so many things with these two teams really not having played essentially in Grand Valley in 3 weeks and Davenport in 2. It almost feels like a first game of the season again, because there's just so much you don't really know. We haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah, I've almost had an opportunity to go back into like a preseason mentality, and for Grand Valley to have that amount of time to just work on their own team without normal game week stuff and installing your game plan and all that. I don't know. I kind of feel like they will have found a way to use that to their advantage heading into the mid part of the season here. So, but we will see. So that's what we have for this week. It was just the 4 games and only 1 for last week. So we'll be back next week to recap these 4 games and, of course, get you prepared for the week coming up as well. Also, of course, make sure that you join us on Sunday night. We may be talking about some of these games, depending on how they play out, depending on what the results are. We'll possibly talk about some of these on Sunday night on Inside D2 Football. Tony, thanks for being here. Apologize to the audience. We had a few snafus there, but apologize for that. Thanks for tuning in. And Tony, before we kind of disperse for the evening, any parting words from you as we head into the first full conference slate?
No, I'm going to join in with what Whit tells people is, hey, get out to a ball game. The weather this weekend in Michigan is going to be insanely good. So there won't be a better weekend probably between here and the end of the season to get out and catch a game. So hopefully everybody else packs the stands, and we'll see you out there.
Looks good here in Pennsylvania as well. I know I'll be getting out to a game or two, and looking forward to seeing everybody on Sunday night. And then we'll be back here mid next week for another episode of GLIAC Weekly. He's Tony. I'm Chuck. Thanks for tuning in.